In 135 AD, a Roman slave stood in chains before his master, his legs shattered by deliberate cruelty. While others would have drowned in rage or despair, Epictetus looked at his torturer and said, "You are breaking my leg." When the bone snapped, he simply added, "I told you it would break." No screaming, no begging, just observation. This wasn't superhuman endurance. This was technique. And what Epictetus discovered in that moment of absolute powerlessness would become the most practical framework for conquering the modern existential crisis. Today, we're decoding exactly how a slave who owned nothing mastered everything that matters. This is the Stoic dichotomy of control, the single most misunderstood principle in ancient philosophy, yet the most scientifically validated approach to psychological resilience. Epictetus didn't just survive slavery, exile, and physical torture. He transformed his consciousness so completely that Roman emperors would later study his teachings. What he taught wasn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. It was a systematic rewiring of perception that modern neuroscience confirms actually changes brain structure. The technique is precise, the results are measurable, and the application starts with understanding what Epictetus actually meant when he divided reality into two categories. Before we break down this framework step by step, subscribe to this channel, where we decode ancient wisdom with scientific precision and practical application. New deep dives every week into the techniques that actually transform consciousness. Here's what most people miss about existential crisis. It's not caused by the chaos of the world. It's caused by attempting to control what Epictetus identified as fundamentally uncontrollable. Your existential dread isn't a philosophical problem, it's a targeting error. You're aiming your will at the wrong territory. Epictetus observed that humans suffer not from events themselves, but from their judgments about events. This sounds like ancient platitude until you understand the mechanics. When you experience existential anxiety, your prefrontal cortex is attempting to impose certainty on inherent uncertainty. Your brain is running control algorithms on variables it cannot compute. The result is what neuroscientists call cognitive dissonance, and what you experience as existential paralysis. Epictetus divided all of existence into two domains. First, things within your control, your judgments, your impulses, your desires, your aversions, and your action. That's it. That's the complete list. Second, everything else, your body, your property, your reputation, your relationships, outcomes, other people's opinions, death, suffering, the entire external world. Notice what he does not say. He doesn't say you can influence these things. He doesn't say you should try really hard to control them. He says they are fundamentally outside your sphere of power. This isn't pessimism. This is precision. And here's where it gets technical. Modern psychology has spent 70 years confirming what Epictetus taught in the 2nd century. The concept of locus of control, developed by Julian Rotter in 1954, distinguishes between internal and external control orientation. People with internal locus of control, those who focus on what they can actually govern, show significantly lower rates of anxiety, depression, and existential distress. They're not happier because their lives are easier. They're psychologically resilient because they're not exhausting their will on impossible tasks. Epictetus understood that your will is like muscular strength. It has finite capacity. When you spend it trying to control your reputation, other people's behavior, or whether you'll die tomorrow, you deplete the resource you need for what you can control. your response. Let's walk through the practical application step by step, because this is where most people completely misapply Stoic philosophy. Step 1. Identify what's actually in your control right now, not what you wish were in your control, not what you think should be in your control. What actually is. You're facing an existential crisis about the meaninglessness of existence. You cannot control whether existence has inherent meaning. That's outside your domain. You can control whether you assign meaning through your choices. You cannot control death. You can control how you interpret mortality, as terror or as urgency that makes each moment valuable. You cannot control whether you'll succeed. You can control the quality of effort you bring to the attempt. Step 2. Redirect all psychological energy from the uncontrollable to the controllable. This is not acceptance in the passive sense. This is strategic reallocation of will. Epictetus used a specific technique he called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Every morning, he would mentally rehearse everything that could go wrong that day. Not to cultivate anxiety, but to remove surprise. He would imagine insults, losses, betrayals, physical pain. Then he would practice his response. This is not in my control. My judgment about it is. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy uses this exact technique, calling it cognitive rehearsal or stress inoculation. When you pre-experience the worst outcomes and practice your response, you're literally building neural pathways that activate during actual crisis. You're not hoping you'll respond well. You're training the response. Step 3. Practice the discipline of assent. This is Epictetus's most technical teaching. Every impression that enters your mind, every thought, every emotion, every external event presents itself for your approval. The Stoic discipline is to pause before granting assent. An existential thought arises. Nothing I do matters in the vastness of cosmic time. That's an impression. It feels true. It demands your agreement. Epictetus would say, stop, examine it. Is this within my control? No. Does agreeing with this impression help me act virtuously right now? No. Then I withhold assent. I acknowledge the thought without empowering it. This is not suppression. You're not pretending the thought doesn't exist. You're refusing to let it govern your will. Neuroscience confirms this works. The gap between stimulus and response, what Viktor Frankl would later call man's ultimate freedom, is trainable. You can literally expand the space between thought and reaction through practice. Here's where most people fail with Stoic philosophy, and it's crucial you understand this. They confuse Stoic indifference with emotional numbness. Epictetus was not teaching you to stop caring. He was teaching you to care about the right things in the right way. You should care deeply about your character, your choices, your integrity. These are in your control. You should not stake your peace of mind on outcomes you cannot govern. The common mistake is applying Stoic detachment to things that actually are within your control. Someone says, I'm being Stoic about my health, so I won't exercise or eat well. That's not Stoicism. That's nihilism wearing a philosophical mask. Your health outcomes are not fully in your control. Your health behaviors absolutely are. Epictetus would tell you to control what you can with absolute discipline and accept what you cannot with absolute serenity. Let's examine a documented case from Epictetus's own life, because this is where theory becomes technique. After gaining his freedom from slavery, Epictetus established a school in Nicopolis. In 93 A.D., Emperor Domitian expelled all philosophers from Rome, viewing them as threats to his authority. Epictetus lost his school, his home, his entire external structure. His response is recorded by his student Arian. He simply moved to a different location and continued teaching. No recorded bitterness, no existential collapse about the injustice. Why? Because he had already categorized these events correctly. The emperor's decision was outside his control. His response was within it. He chose to continue his work. The external circumstances changed. His internal purpose remained constant. This is not superhuman detachment. This is practice technique applied under pressure. Now, let's connect this to your specific existential crisis, because Epictetus's framework directly addresses the core of existential anxiety. Modern existentialism, from Kierkegaard through Sartre and Camus, identifies the fundamental human problem as confronting meaninglessness, death, isolation, and freedom. These produce what they call existential dread, the vertigo of realizing you're a conscious being in an indifferent universe with no inherent purpose. Epictetus would say, "You're suffering because you're trying to control the uncontrollable. You cannot control whether the universe has inherent meaning. You can control whether you create meaning through virtuous action. You cannot control death. You can control how you live before it arrives. You cannot control isolation. You're fundamentally alone in your consciousness. You can control the quality of connection you offer others. You cannot control having freedom. You can control what you do with it." The scientific validation of this approach is overwhelming. Dr. Albert Ellis, founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, explicitly built his therapeutic model on Epictetus's teaching that people are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. Cognitive therapy, which has become the gold standard for treating anxiety and depression, is essentially applied Stoicism. The core technique, identifying and challenging irrational beliefs, is Epictetus's discipline of assent translated into clinical practice. Studies show that cognitive restructuring based on Stoic principles reduces existential anxiety more effectively than medication alone. This isn't ancient philosophy. This is applied neuroscience that happens to be 2,000 years old. Here's the advanced application that transforms this from coping mechanism to existential mastery. Epictetus taught that once you truly internalize the dichotomy of control, you become what he called unimpedable. Nothing can obstruct you because you're no longer pursuing what can be obstructed. Your goal is not success. That's not fully in your control. Your goal is excellent effort. That is. Your goal is not to be loved. That's outside your power. Your goal is to be loving. That's within it. Your goal is not to avoid death. Impossible. Your goal is to live with virtue until death arrives. Completely achievable. Notice what happens make this shift. Existential crisis evaporates. Not because you found cosmic meaning, but because you've stopped demanding it from sources that cannot provide it. You've relocated meaning to the only place it can actually exist, in your choices, moment by moment. Let that sink in for a moment. The existential crisis you're experiencing is not a philosophical problem requiring a philosophical solution. It's a control problem requiring a technical correction. You're aiming your will at targets outside your range. Epictetus is teaching you to adjust your aim. But there's one element of this technique most people completely miss, and it's the difference between intellectual understanding and embodied practice. You can agree with everything I've said and still suffer existential dread tomorrow morning. Why? Because Epictetus didn't teach this as philosophy to be understood. He taught it as athletics to be trained. He called his school not an academy, but a hospital for sick souls. The Stoic exercises were daily practices, not occasional reflections. Every morning, premeditation of adversity. Throughout the day, discipline of assent on every impression. Every evening, review of the day's choices, examining where you controlled what you could and accepted what you couldn't. This is not journaling for insight. This is strength training for consciousness. The modern application looks like this. You wake up with existential dread about the meaninglessness of your work. Pause. Apply the dichotomy. Can I control whether my work has cosmic significance? No. Can I control whether I bring excellence to it today? Yes. Can I control whether I'll be remembered after I die? No. Can I control whether I act with integrity while I'm alive? Yes. You're not suppressing the existential question. You're correctly categorizing it. It's outside your control, so it's outside your concern. What is your concern? The quality of your character in this moment. That's the only territory where you have jurisdiction. And here's the paradox Epictetus discovered. When you stop trying to control everything, you gain mastery over the only thing that matters, yourself. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating. When you practice the dichotomy of control consistently, you're strengthening your brain's executive function network while reducing activity in the default mode network associated with rumination and existential anxiety. fMRI studies of experienced meditators who practice a similar distinction between what they can control in their minds and what they cannot show increased gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex and decreased amygdala reactivity. You're not just thinking differently, you're building different brain architecture. Epictetus understood this experientially. Modern neuroscience confirms it empirically. The technique works because it aligns your psychology with reality instead of fighting it. Here's where Epictetus's teaching diverges from everything else you've heard about overcoming existential crisis. Modern self-help tells you to find your purpose, manifest your destiny, control your outcomes through positive thinking. Epictetus says that's precisely what's making you suffer. You're trying to impose control on what cannot be controlled. Existential philosophy tells you to courageously confront the absurdity of existence. Epictetus says, stop fighting with reality, accept what is outside your power, and master what is within it. Religious approaches tell you to find meaning in divine purpose. Epictetus says, you don't need cosmic meaning, you need virtuous action. The meaning is not out there to be found. It's in here to be created through your choices. This is crucial. Epictetus is not teaching resignation, he's teaching strategic focus. A general who tries to control the weather, the terrain, and the enemy's decisions will lose. A general who accepts the weather, adapts to the terrain, and focuses on controlling his own troops' discipline and tactics will win. You are the general of your own consciousness. Existential crisis is what happens when you're trying to command forces outside your army. Epictetus is teaching you to pull back your attention to what you actually command. Your judgments, your will, your responses, everything else is weather. The documented results of this practice are remarkable. Marcus Aurelius, who became the most powerful man in the world as Roman emperor, used Epictetus's teachings as his daily operating system. His private journals, now known as meditations, are essentially records of him applying the dichotomy of control to imperial crises. Plague, war, betrayal, the weight of absolute power, he faced existential pressures that would crush most humans. His consistent practice, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't born with superhuman resilience. He trained it using Epictetus's technique, the same technique available to you right now. Let's address the most common objection to this approach, because you're probably thinking it. If I stop caring about outcomes, won't I become passive and unmotivated? This reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. Epictetus is not telling you to stop pursuing outcomes. He's telling you to stop attaching your peace of mind to them. You should absolutely work toward goals. You should plan, strategize, and execute with full intensity. But your self-worth, your psychological stability, and your sense of meaning cannot depend on results you don't fully control. The Stoic athlete trains with absolute discipline, not because he can control winning, but because he can control his preparation. He competes with full effort, not because he can guarantee victory, but because he can guarantee his excellence. When he loses, he doesn't experience existential collapse, because his identity was never staked on the outcome. It was staked on the quality of his effort, which he controlled completely. This is the vanishing point Epictetus discovered, the place where existential crisis disappears. It's not a destination you reach. It's a perspective you adopt. When you look at reality through the dichotomy of control, the existential questions that once paralyzed you simply lose their power. Does life have meaning? That's not in your control, so it's not your concern. What is your concern? Creating meaning through virtuous action today. Will you be remembered after death? Not in your control. What is? Living with integrity before death arrives. Are you significant in cosmic terms? Not controllable. What is? Being significant in your choices right now. The questions don't get answered. They get correctly categorized as outside your jurisdiction. And once they're outside your jurisdiction, they stop generating crisis. The practical execution looks like this, and I want you to try this tonight. Before sleep, review your day through Epictetus's lens. Identify 3 moments where you suffered. For each one, ask, was I trying to control something outside my power? Almost certainly yes. What was in my power in that situation? Your judgment, your response, your choice of action. Did you exercise that power well? If yes, there's no problem. You controlled what you could. If no, that's your only legitimate concern, not the outcome, but the quality of your response. This is not self-criticism. This is calibration. You're training your consciousness to aim at the right targets. Do this for 30 days, and you'll notice something remarkable. The existential crises that once consumed hours of rumination will begin to dissolve on contact, not because you've found cosmic answers, but because you've stopped asking cosmic questions of your finite will. So here's what Epictetus really discovered in those chains 2,000 years ago. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. Freedom is the recognition of what you actually control. The slave who knows he controls his mind is freer than the emperor who thinks he controls the world. Your existential crisis exists because you're trying to be emperor of reality. Epictetus is teaching you to be master of yourself. The first is impossible and generates infinite suffering. The second is achievable and generates unshakable peace. This isn't metaphor. This is mechanics. The universe will not bend to your will, but your will can align with reality. That alignment is what Epictetus called wisdom. That wisdom is what conquers existential crisis. Tonight, when existential dread arrives, and it will, you know exactly what to do. Pause, Apply the dichotomy. Is this in my control? If no, release it. If yes, act on it. The technique is simple, the practice is daily, the results are inevitable. This is just one layer of Stoic wisdom. The laboratory is your own consciousness. The experiment starts tonight. Document your results. If this breakdown gave you clarity, subscribe to this channel for more technical deep dives into ancient wisdom applied to modern life. Hit that like button, drop your questions or experiences in the comments, and remember, this isn't theory, this is applied philosophy. Welcome to the practice.